George Hormel's story begins in 1860 in Buffalo, New York, where he was born to German immigrants. His parents, with little means of wealth, believed in the value of hard labor over comfort. His father worked as both a tanner and a butcher, and from a young age, George was thrust into the world of work. By the time he was just 12, George had already dropped out of school to help support the family. This decision, while seemingly a setback in his formal education, would mark the beginning of a lifelong education in the realities of industrial labor. George's early jobs were as physically demanding as they were diverse. He worked on farms, hauled timber, and eventually became an assistant to a traveling meat packer. These roles weren't glamorous, but they gave George a deep understanding of the meat industry, from handling livestock to meat breakdown, preservation, and transportation. However, one incident early in his career would set the tone for his future in the food industry. George was dismissed from a job at a meatpacking plant for raising concerns about unsanitary conditions. While many accepted the dirty, unsanitary practices as standard, George's insistence on cleanliness and safety marked him as different. The firing wasn't just a setback. It was a turning point. This incident deepened his understanding that the meat industry required not only muscle but also integrity, and it fueled his lifelong obsession with food security and affordability. Despite his humble beginnings, George's drive led him to notice something that others often overlooked: the vast amount of edible meat that went to waste in meatpacking plants. Fatty trimmings, bones with rich flavor still intact, and shoulder cuts were discarded, tossed aside as useless byproducts. George saw an opportunity where others saw waste. He wasn't yet an inventor, but his curiosity and resourcefulness were growing. Over time, George became increasingly fascinated by how these overlooked scraps could be transformed into something valuable. It was an idea that would stay with him and would eventually spark a food revolution. The birth of Spam and the making of a legacy. In the late 1880s, George Hormel's journey took him westward to Austin, Minnesota, where he saw an opportunity to start his own business. By this time, he had accumulated knowledge of the meat industry, and with a loan of $500, George opened a modest butcher shop. Austin, a small agricultural town, wasn't a booming metropolis, and it was dominated by larger meat companies in the cities. However, George believed that his experience in meatpacking, combined with his determination, could give him an edge. From the start, his business faced challenges. Refrigeration breakdowns, sanitation issues, and labor shortages created financial strain and forced George to constantly adapt. One of his early failures involved selling smoked goose, which drew very few buyers and wasted valuable resources. However, instead of retreating, George learned from his mistakes and continued to improve his business. George's breakthrough came not from grand innovation, but from persistence. He began to experiment with different types of sausages, selling them at local county fairs and farmers markets. Slowly but steadily, his reputation grew. He earned the trust of local farmers and customers through fair dealings and consistent quality. By 1893, George's personal life began to stabilize as well. He married Lillian Gleason, a school teacher from Austin, and together they had a son, J. Catherwood Hormel. With a growing family to support, George's commitment to his butcher shop deepened. Despite the challenges, George's business began to flourish. As the shop evolved into a small processing facility, George was not just selling meat. He was shaping the way meat was packaged and sold. This marked the beginning of something much larger. But prosperity would be short-lived. In the early 1900s, George faced betrayal from within his own company, an event that would nearly destroy everything he had worked for. The Hormel strike and a new beginning. By 1903, George Hormel's business had expanded significantly. His products, particularly his cured ham and sausages, were gaining regional recognition. However, with success came the threat of betrayal. Longtime managers, trusted with the company's finances, had been secretly embezzling funds and falsifying financial records. The financial damage was severe, with more than $20,000, a sum equivalent to more than $500,000 today, being stolen. This led to payroll delays, slow production, and a decline in employee morale. George uncovered the fraud just as the company was on the verge of collapse. The scandal became public, and George was forced to face intense scrutiny from the media and the public. Despite the challenges, George's response to the scandal demonstrated his resilience. He immediately fired the implicated managers and brought in outside auditors to investigate the financial records. He overhauled the company's leadership and put in place a system of checks and balances to ensure such a betrayal would never happen again. Though the betrayal left deep scars, George's determination to rebuild the company made him more cautious and involved in every aspect of the business. His experience taught him that resilience had to be built into every layer of his company, from hiring and training to finance and management. With the company's internal structure now more secure, George shifted his focus back to growth. He recognized that in order to succeed in the ever-evolving food industry, he needed to look to the future. This included allowing his son, J. Hormel, to take a more active role in the company's management. J. Hormel and the birth of Spam. When J. Hormel returned from World War I in the early 1920s, he brought with him a fresh, modern perspective on business and food production. While George had built the company with caution and discipline, Jay was driven by a bold vision of innovation and public relations. He quickly became involved in the day-to-day operations of the company, pushing for changes that raised eyebrows within the more traditional ranks of Hormel's employees. Jay advocated for mechanizing parts of the factory floor, creating centralized production schedules, and adopting more aggressive branding strategies. George hesitated at first, but Jay's persistence eventually earned him room to test his ideas. One of Jay's first big projects, a canned chicken and rice product, ended in failure. The texture was mushy, and the flavor didn't hold up after canning. The product was rejected by retailers, but Jay didn't retreat. Instead, he used the failure as a learning experience, revamping Hormel's research team to develop a better product. In the early 1930s, Jay turned his attention to one of the most underutilized and undervalued cuts of pork, the shoulder. Typically discarded or sold at a loss, pork shoulder was considered tough and fatty. But Jay believed that if he could find a way to process and sell it creatively, Hormel could turn waste into wealth. Despite resistance from some of the company's senior board members, Jay pushed forward. By the mid-1930s, Hormel had successfully created a new product, Spam, a canned meat made from pork shoulder with a smooth texture, long shelf life, and a uniquely salty flavor. Spam goes to war and becomes a global phenomenon in 1937. After naming the product Spam through a public contest, J. Hormel faced another challenge, convincing the public to trust this new canned meat. To overcome the initial skepticism, Jay implemented bold marketing tactics. He personally visited grocery stores, offered cooking demonstrations, and sponsored radio programs to promote Spam's versatility and convenience. As word spread and more people tasted it, Spam's sales slowly climbed. Then came World War II, which would change the fate of Spam forever. The U.S. military needed a shelf-stable protein to feed its troops overseas. Spam's long shelf life, portability, and ease of storage made it the perfect solution. Between 1941 and 1945, the company supplied over 100 million cans of Spam to the U.S. military. During wartime, Spam became a staple of military rations, and its popularity soared. Despite the mixed reception among soldiers who joked about having Spam for every meal, its utility in wartime solidified Spam's place in American culture. At home, Hormel faced criticism for profiting off government contracts, but he responded by freezing prices for military sales and redirecting some profits to war bonds and community causes, which helped restore the company's reputation. Spam's global expansion and legacy. After World War II, Spam didn't disappear. It spread across the globe, finding new markets in places like South Korea, Japan, and Hawaii, where it became an essential part of daily meals. Spam's versatility and long shelf life made it an ideal food product for post-war recovery. J. Hormel knew that global success would require cultural adaptation, so Hormel adjusted Spam's recipe to fit local tastes and developed bilingual packaging to appeal to international consumers. In Hawaii, Spam became a staple ingredient in dishes like Spam musubi and fried rice. Today, Spam is sold in over 40 countries, and more than 8 billion cans have been sold worldwide. The brand has launched limited edition flavors, kosher and halal versions, and has even sponsored cooking contests. Its legacy is celebrated in festivals like Hawaii's Spam Jam. Hormel's story is a testament to the power of innovation and resilience. From a poor boy working in factories to the founder of one of the most iconic food brands, George Hormel proved that greatness can come from the most unlikely of beginnings. The story of George Hormel and Spam is one of perseverance, creativity, and transformation. Through challenges, betrayals, and the trials of building a business from the ground up, George's determination laid the foundation for a company that would eventually revolutionize the food industry. His son Jay's bold vision pushed Hormel into new territories, creating a product that would become a global phenomenon. Today, Hormel's legacy lives on in every can of Spam sold worldwide, a symbol of innovation born from humble beginnings.